the Hamptons, Shelter Island, and the North Fork is pleased to be sponsoring this debate for the candidates running for New York State Senate from New York State Senate District Number 1. Let us begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Where is our flag? There it is. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The debate this evening is between attorney Laura Ahern and Assemblyman Anthony Palumbo. They are the candidates running for New York State Senate from New York State Senate District Number 1. I am Estelle Gelman. I am co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Hamptons, Shelter Island, and the North Fork, and I will be moderating this debate. The other member of the League, who you will see on screen, is Barbara McClancy, who is chair of our Voter Services Committee and will be our timer. Others in the League who were instrumental in enabling this debate were Arlene Hinkemeyer, our publicity chairperson, and Ann Marshall, who will be monitoring the debate this evening. Our thanks go to all of those who contributed questions for the debate, and a very special thanks to Charles Certain and CTV, whose technical support has made it possible to hold this debate through Zoom and make it available via YouTube until the election. We also thank the candidates for agreeing to participate in a Zoom debate, and we thank you for watching. Now, just a little about the League. The League of Women Voters is a political but nonpartisan national organization. While we never endorse parties or candidates, we are involved in education and advocacy on the many issues affecting our community. Foremost among our goals is to educate voters, stimulate voter interest, and encourage voter participation. We are respected for sponsoring fair and impartial candidate debates, such as this one, and for the educational materials we distribute on voting issues. Now, to move on to the ground rules for the debate. This debate will use a traditional format. The order of speaking was determined alphabetically, with Laura Ahern giving her opening statement first and responding to the first question. The order of response will alternate for the following questions, and Anthony Palumbo will be the first to give his closing statement. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for their opening statement. Each candidate will then have up to 2 minutes to respond to each question and will have 1 minute for a closing statement. In addition, each candidate may, by raising their hand, and make sure I see it, be recognized out of turn 3 times for a 1 minute rebuttal to the response from the other candidate. We will now begin the opening statements, and Laura Ahern, you will speak first.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the League for hosting this event. COVID-19 is a human catastrophe that has wreaked havoc on our lives and on our economy. We desperately need federal relief, and we need another Democrat in the Long Island delegation to strengthen our voice and our fight for our fair share in Albany. I'm a fighter and I'm independent. I'm an attorney, a social worker, a military mom, and the executive director of the Crime Victim Center. For nearly 25 years, I have fought to keep us safe and have provided services to victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, gang violence, human trafficking, hate crime, and elderly, veterans, and disabled victims of crime. Over 20 years ago, I founded the Crime Victim Center from a room in my home, and I built it to become a full service agency employing nearly 30 full-time staff. We're contracted by government to provide critical services to help protect and serve. I have worked with local, state, and federal law enforcement, and lawmakers for over 20 years. I have boots on the ground experience developing and implementing programs targeting specific issues, and we've had remarkable results here in Suffolk County. We've educated over 200,000 children and adults in public and private schools. We've reduced sex offender recidivism by 75%. We've helped implement a DV prevention program that resulted in domestic violence arrests going down 20%. We've also facilitated the return of over $6 million directly to crime victims right here in Suffolk County. I went to law school at night while running the Rape Crisis Center. I graduated top of my class and received the Schwartz Award for Civil Rights for my work with crime victims. I have a law practice and I represent adults sexually abused as children. I'm also a disaster mental health responder and providing support to families after 9/11. I'm married to a retired Suffolk County Police Department police officer. I have 2 children, and my youngest and her husband are Navy veterans. I am running for New York State Senate because I want to fight for our fair share and to protect taxpayers, healthcare, education, public safety, our water, and our environment.
Thank you. And now, Anthony?
Thank you, and thank you to the League for having this debate. And many of you may have heard some of my prior debates and a little bit about me, but I'll just give you a quick background that I have been practicing law for about 20 years. I grew up a little bit further up the island. I live in New Suffolk on the North Fork of Long Island. I went to Lafayette College and then St. John's Law School. And right out of law school, I became a Suffolk County prosecutor. And I was an assistant district attorney for about 7 years, 6 years and change. And I had moved through the ranks, went through a narcotics bureau, a major crime bureau. And then my last 2 years, I was the trial supervisor for the 5 eastern towns. And that's when I really fell in love with the East End and moved out here about 20 years ago. So I have lived out here. And actually, after that tenure in the DA's office, I partnered up on the North Fork with an attorney, became went into private practice. And in 2013, as I always joke, that I had realized after about 15 years that people don't like lawyers. So I got into politics. I'd never been in politics before. I ran for office in 2013 and won. And I've been in the Assembly working closely with Senator Ken Lavalle, Assemblyman Fred Thiel. And the First Senate District is it's a smaller version of the second, it's a larger version rather of the second Assembly District, where we have rural East End on the eastern end of it. I have the 2 eastern towns and then suburbia on the west. So it's really about taxes and jobs. My first bill was a first-time homebuyer exemption. We preserved over 1,000 acres in Shoreham and in Mastic. And I created, among many other things that I've accomplished in my 7 years in the Assembly, a North Fork mental health initiative, because that's always a concern. I'm sure we're going to discuss it as far as services on the East End, but it's a pleasure to be here and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you. We will now begin questioning. And candidates, please remember to raise your hand and wait to be recognized if you would like to rebut your opponent's response. Okay, the first question is going to be for Laura first, and it's going to be on the economy. The pandemic has led to the closing of many small businesses, job loss, and reduced state tax revenue. What actions would you support to help our local and state economy recover from the effects of the pandemic?
Thank you, Estelle. So COVID-19 has literally decimated our economy. This year, New York State passed a $177 billion budget, but it's a revolving budget. We pay for what we can when revenue comes in. Sales tax revenues are dramatically down. Income tax revenue is down. New York State, county, and local governments need desperately that last federal stimulus package. And unfortunately, the current federal administration is playing politics with people's lives and businesses. We need help to fund our schools, our hospitals, our police departments, our fire departments, and other critical services. So what we have to do, though, first is we have to fight for that federal stimulus money. Then we have to make investments, right? We have to invest in our infrastructure. When America is in a financial crisis, what America always does is it invests in rebuilding our bridges. It invests in our roads and fixing our roadways. One of the great things that we have right now, opportunities we have, is an opportunity to invest in green infrastructure, in revitalizing our downtowns. We have such opportunity right now to make these investments in our downtowns that can become pedestrian friendly, transit-based housing to offer opportunities for families to have that affordable housing, for small businesses to prosper, and also for us to give opportunities for small businesses to get tax incentives. So we have to invest in infrastructure, and we have to invest in ensuring that our small businesses have what they need to survive. Because look, the bottom line is that raising taxes is not going to do it. Right now, our school district budgets, our healthcare budget, our public safety budget, they're all at risk if we don't get this federal stimulus money. So besides stimulating our economy by making investments, we need that federal stimulus money.
Thank you. Anthony?
Sure. Well, the investment needs to be made in business, not in many other things, as just mentioned. I think what we need to do, and we're in a crisis, and prior to this pandemic, we had a $6 billion budget deficit. So our problem has always been a spending problem in New York. When the governor first took office, the budget was around 90 billion with a B, and now it was 178 last year. And we spend every penny. I just think that what we need to do is focus on two things: smartly and safely opening and deregulating in New York so businesses can get back on track. There were metrics in a Wall Street Journal article indicating that partially open versus completely open have essentially the same infection rates. We know how serious this is. We all get it now. And I think the fact that we continue to remain closed and have these random closures that the governor feels were are hot spots, so to speak, I don't think that that's conducive to smartly and safely opening, because we've had Walmart open the entire time. We've had Target open since day one. These small businesses are suffering. And I think that to respond directly to your answer, what can we do regarding COVID? We need to do it smartly. And I'm not suggesting we don't, but I think that the general public knows how serious this is. And we need to figure out ways that we can trim the fat. For example, the crisis was in full swing in the beginning of April when we passed this current budget, and we had a $400 million tax credit for Hollywood, for filmmaking in New York. Now, it usually brings in a lot of collateral business, so that's not always a terrible idea. But in this crisis, we don't need to give $400 million to Hollywood. Nobody's filming anything. $144 million to ski resorts. I think it's a spending problem. We need to reopen smartly and safely.
Okay, thank you. The next question is going to have to do with police practice and racism. In June, Governor Cuomo signed the Say Their Name reform package that bans chokeholds, makes false race-based 9/11 reports a hate crime, makes the Attorney General an independent prosecutor for matters relating to the deaths of unarmed civilians caused by law enforcement, and includes repeal of New York Civil Rights Law 50A, a law that provides for non-disclosure of police department disciplinary records. Do you believe that this package goes too far or not far enough? And please give your reasons. And Anthony, you go first on this one.
Okay, well, certainly. Well, it goes too far. And in fact, many of it goes way too far. My father was a Suffolk County homicide detective. As I said, I was in law enforcement myself as a prosecutor. I've always had law enforcement support. I'm the ranking Republican on the Judiciary Committee, so I've always debated those issues, being very, very well versed, if I may humbly say, in criminal justice issues. And I have the support of virtually every law enforcement agency in New York State in this campaign, because I think that they know that I see the issues. And the problem is this: when you don't include all the stakeholders in any issue in government, you create bad legislation. This legislation did not include the DA's Association, did not include law enforcement, Now, were there some changes that were necessary? Yeah, I think that we could have made some smart changes, but nothing like we've seen. And when you have these painting every single member of an occupation with the same brush, it's not only is it prejudicial, it's unfair. For example, the repeal of the 50A, the civil rights law, where now that there is no protection at all for even unfounded complaints, it was moved into the FOIL statute, so it can be foiled by anyone without any lawful purpose. The personnel records of a police officer. They are dealing with dangerous people every single day, and you have physicians who don't have those concerns. They're protected, unfounded complaints particularly. School teachers, they must be expunged from their record. So why would the pendulum swing so far? And other than really for what I believe is misinformed reasons that this legislation would pass. And one quick example is the bail reform. I debated that last year, and I said, look, this bail reform, every nonviolent felony, there are fatalities like manslaughter in the second degree that are nonviolent felonies. They were included in that legislation. They disregarded it, and they tried to make some changes to it again this year, and it is still extremely dangerous. And that's what happens when you don't include all the stakeholders, when you're making over sweeping legislation such as these.
Okay, Bex, your time is up. Laura?
Thank you. As a nation, I think we will all be haunted and have this image of George Floyd indelibly imprinted in our brains as we watched somebody sworn to protect murder somebody completely innocent. So unquestionably, we absolutely needed changes across the nation in those police departments that had those kinds of issues. Here locally, we don't have those kinds of issues here locally in terms of that level of force. However, there are obviously opportunities that we have and had to make sustained and meaningful changes in policies. Now, that state legislation specifically, if we were going to ban chokeholds, we also then needed to increase the penalty for committing an assault on a police officer. So I don't disagree that chokeholds are dangerous. And at the same time, law enforcement needs to have tools to be able to protect themselves. So that was one issue I had with the 4 pillars that started out as 4 pillars. Initially, the governor's legislation included substantiated claims and not unsubstantiated claims. So I supported the release of substantiated claims, but I do not support the release of unsubstantiated claims. I have worked in a crime victim center for over 25 years. I've partnered with local, state, and federal law enforcement. I sit on the county's Criminal Justice Coordinating Council and am involved in steering policy and legislation as it affects individuals in the criminal justice process here in Suffolk County. We, as an organization, partner with law enforcement, and when there are issues, what we do, and Tony mentioned that, we actually work directly with those individuals when there's a problem. So I am truly a collaborator. I want stakeholders sitting at the table, and I want to have a conversation before drastic sweeping changes are made. But some of that legislation was absolutely needed.
Okay, thank you. The next question is on health, and Laura, you will go first on this one. With the loss of jobs due to the pandemic, many individuals have lost their employer-sponsored health insurance. In the short run, how would you provide help to those who are currently without insurance? And in the long run, would you support the New York Health Act? In your response, please explain your reasons for either supporting or opposing the act.
Thank you. So healthcare is an absolute human right. There should be not one person that does not have access to quality healthcare and low-cost prescription drugs. But we have a problem in New York. The New York Health Act has been lingering for years, and it's just never going to pass. And the majority leader has said that we all agree that everybody needs to have access to quality healthcare and low-cost prescription drugs, but it's a matter of how we get there. Healthcare needs to be dealt with on a federal level because it needs to be the same across all 50 states. Right now, if New York State changed their healthcare system, then other states surrounding us could be potentially burdening businesses, because the New York Health Act is going to require that businesses actually take up the slack on the cost. But right now, what we should have is everybody should be able to access healthcare. And if that means I know we have Medicaid, and there are different types of support services that are available for folks. We work on those human service issues at my organization. Healthcare is accessible for those who need to get at that healthcare. So they have to connect with various not-for-profit organizations like mine and others that are out there, because that healthcare is available. It's just a matter of finding it. But long-term, we absolutely have to do something about, as a state, and we can, about low-cost prescription drugs. I know of other counties. I spoke with a couple of the folks up in Albany about this recently. Other counties are actually using Canadian drugs because Canadian drugs are cheaper. Now, that's not legal to do that. So isn't that horrible that we have to, in other counties, go as far as trying to save money to try to give prescription drugs to those in need by having to break the law? That's not acceptable. So on a state level, we need to remedy that. And also we need to make sure that healthcare clinics have the resources they need to be able to provide healthcare to whoever walks in their door.
Thank you. Anthony?
Sure. The New York Health Act used to come to the floor in the Assembly just about every year that I've been there. I voted against it for very significant and very important reasons. I think that there was a narrative created about how it's going to allow everyone universal health care. It's a wonderful thing. And most importantly, when you do it by just as one state, your Medicare, Medicaid reimbursements would never even come close to covering what private insurance pays for example, rural hospitals. Rural hospitals would be out of business if that ever passed. And when you think about the actual numbers, the lower income residents of New York State are on Medicaid. And between that gap between those that get Medicaid and those that have private insurance, it's only 5% of the population. It's 1 million people, roughly. We're about 20 million people in the state. There are some really easy answers without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I shouldn't say easy, but more reasonable answers than overhauling the entire system, because everyone would lose their private health care. All the people in that industry would be fired and no longer would have private health insurance. So those people who work there would be gone. And as you hear many complaints about how you can't get elective procedures, there would just be so many problems. So something like a Child Health Plus for lower income people in that little gap of 5% of the residents, you could cover them with the subsidy from New York State. That would be the smarter way to do this. So the straight answer is the New York Health Act is a bad idea, particularly when you look at how our Medicaid is working now. The comptroller found billions of dollars in waste and fraud in our current Medicaid system, which is the government-funded, government-run healthcare system that we already have. It's not a good idea. So I think there are issues that could be dealt with on the federal level, but my answer to the New York Health Act is no.
Okay, thank you. And Anthony, you will also answer the next question first. It's on sustainability. East Hampton town officials and the company developing an offshore wind farm have reached an agreement that grants the wind farm access to town land so long as the project gets state approval. Would you approve? Why or why not? And what proposals do you have to help New York State move towards more renewable energy?
Well, sure. We have, I think we have the largest solar farm in Senate District 1, east of the Mississippi. We had extended the Pine Barrens, as I mentioned earlier. Senator Lavalle and I, along with Assemblyman Thiel, because he has a little bit of mastic, about 840 of those acres were in my district in Shoreham. So we want to move toward renewables as the technology increases. I think it's smart. I voted for the Climate Protection Act, basically with the understanding that if it's not attainable, we will still be adjusting those goals. But I think it's a laudable goal because it would be really nice to see us move further and further away from fossil fuels. Now, from as far as state approval, I think local control, if they ask for it, in virtually every issue, that local control should be held. It should rule the day. That I don't think that we should start mandating on local townships and local municipalities what should be done. And I know there was some pushback regarding the location of where it would enter. There were some concerns, of course, with even the location of the wind farm offshore. And for example, Chairman Engelbright, Steve Engelbright, another Long Island Assemblyman, is the chairman on the Environmental Conservation Committee, of which I've been a member since I started. For 7 years, I've been on that committee. And we wanted to create a marine mammal preserve around Plum Island to discourage construction and development. And we had some real blowback from the fishing industry. And to clarify everything, we pulled the bill. We had it ready to go. We pulled it, met with them, as I said earlier, bring the stakeholders in, make sure everyone's comfortable with it, and then we go ahead and do it. And that's the same thing that should apply here, that we should make sure that there are some residents I know who have concerns, but that's a big project and that's a big deal. So we need to bring everybody in before we make final decisions in that regard.
Thank you. Laura?
Thank you. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. East Hampton town officials and the company developing an offshore wind farm have reached an agreement that grants the wind farm access to town land so long as the project gets state approval. Would you approve? Why or why not? And what proposals do you have to help New York State move towards more renewable energy?
Thank you. So, look, climate change is a very real and present threat, and we are on the front lines here. We are surrounded basically by 1,000 miles of shoreline on Long Island, and our increasing carbon footprint is having a profound effect on our environment, on our economy, our public health. Rising sea levels right here and extreme weather events are eroding our shorelines. Climate change is having a significant impact. So we have to move toward renewable, sustainable energy. And that starts with the various sectors that are the biggest polluters, right? Transportation sector pollutes 36% of the carbon emissions are coming from transportation. The electricity generation sector is generating about 15% of carbon emissions that are polluting and destroying our environment. So we have to take swift action. And the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that Tony spoke about, that is going to has set our renewable, sustainable energy electricity generation goals. So the New York State Offshore Wind Master Plan has to be implemented to achieve our goals. We're supposed to reach our state's electricity generation goals from renewable sources by 2030. The South Fork Wind Farm is going to be 15 turbines to power 70,000 homes right here in Senate District 1. And it's so exciting because we're going to be the recipients of the very first wind farm in all of New York State. So it's exciting. Then there'll be Sunrise Wind Farm. Then there's going to be another wind farm as well. So that's going to move us toward obtaining our renewable, sustainable energy goals through electricity generation. But then we have to focus on the transportation sector, who is emitting, as I said, like 36% of our carbon emissions. In terms of whether or not the state should step in, I agree wholeheartedly that the state should have, when there's NIMBYism, we should work with stakeholders, but the state should step in so that we can move forward to meet our climate leadership goals.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is going to be on housing. And Laura, you will go first on this. The lack of affordable housing is a problem throughout our district. Would you support legislation to amend the CPF fund to add 0.5% to the real estate transfer tax to fund affordable housing? Why or why not? And what other ideas do you have that might solve this problem?
So thank you. Yes, affordable housing is absolutely essential if we're going to maintain the viability of our communities across our Senate District 1 and across Long Island. Each of our towns in SD1 have different needs, but we do all share the same common problem, And COVID has exacerbated the problem, right, on the North End and South Fork, because our children and seniors, they can't afford to live here, and workers who are basically the backbone of our communities, they can't afford to buy homes. And renting doesn't make it any better, because if you're renting, you're paying a high rent and you can't save enough money to put a down payment on a house. So the lack of affordable housing then results in gaps of services. Teachers, police officers, firefighters, medical staff, basically service staff that are supporting our communities can't afford to buy a home, and they can't afford to start their families. So I absolutely support Assemblyman Thiel's proposal for a half percent transfer tax added on to the CPF, but that has to also be approved by towns by referendum. That would assist with affordable housing. But also we have to make the housing stock more affordable in the first place. So maybe we need to look at what our stock is right now and then work on revitalizing those downtowns, maybe add some transit-based housing projects like the Ronkonkoma Hub to make housing more affordable for young families. And also, you know, it could create potentially, transit-based housing could create potentially this environment for a pedestrian-friendly green downtown. So it can stimulate the economy in the short term and also in the long term as well. And, you know, each community has to look at what their housing stock is and what their comfort level is. But sometimes housing involves more than just a single family home. Sometimes housing involves condos and maybe legal accessory apartments. But every community is different. But as a state lawmaker, I will help you identify funds for revitalization for those communities.
Okay, thank you. Anthony?
Thank you. And you know, that's obviously a big issue. I co-sponsored that bill with Assemblyman Thiel. And as a Republican, I think many of my colleagues cringed at more taxes for Long Island, but that's how serious it is, particularly on the East End, that we've got so many people working in our local farming industry and young kids. I've got a 9th grader and an 11th grader. And the kids are unfortunately fleeing the area because of the lack of affordable housing. So this is something that I think is we're in dire need for it. I live in South Old Town. They've been making a big push to increase those areas in the Hamlet business as well. But I do support that subsidy, that 0.5% tax to create a fund like the CPF to just get to the promised land so that younger families and younger people can afford homes. We have a workforce issue that it was even worse on the North Fork. Several years ago, we only had one train that came to Greenport. It would come deadhead without passengers from Ronkonkoma to Greenport and then basically make one loop. So fortunately, we met with Long Island Railroad, MTA, and now we have 4 trains. So that's a help to at least have some commuters who are going to be able to get out here and work. But that is just one of that's a small solution to a big problem. That we certainly have very significant issues regarding affordable housing. I do support it. As I mentioned, I co-sponsored it. And hopefully in the future, we can make it law.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, Anthony, you will go first on this one. The minority communities are getting hit especially hard with COVID-19. Many of these people are at higher risk for contracting the virus due to underlying conditions, yet they have less access to quality health care. The pandemic has also highlighted the differences between wealthier and poorer districts in education. What actions would you support to ameliorate these disparities? Sure.
Well, that's I think access to healthcare is certainly a hot button issue. And in my tenure, Southampton became affiliated with Stony Brook. Eastern Long Island Hospital became affiliated with Stony Brook. Central Suffolk is now with Northwell, because we do have healthcare very significant issues on the East End. The 5 eastern towns have always had a problem with that. Of course, as everyone knows, I'm preaching to the choir, but if you're in Montauk and you need healthcare, you need to get to Southampton's the closest, And if it's more severe traumatic healthcare, you usually just airlifted to Stony Brook. And that was a concern with mental health services, as I mentioned earlier, the North Fork Mental Health Initiative. We were able to create that because we didn't have mental health services for students. And it'll segue me into that aspect regarding students and education. But these kids either had a conversation with someone who was, say, for example, a school nurse, and has some training, of course, regarding mental health, but isn't a mental health professional. And it was either that or an ambulance ride to CPEP at Stony Brook. We didn't have those intermediate services. So the North Fork Mental Health Initiative had created office hours. We had 2 mental health professionals who could then have walk-in hours where it could be more confidential. They don't have to tell the teacher, and they could talk about bullying and other issues, suicidal ideation, whatever it may be, instead of having either end of the spectrum only available to these students when it came to mental health services. So access to healthcare is huge for minority communities, but I think that also applies very significantly to the eastern towns in the Senate district. And as far as access to education, this has really shined quite a light, I think, the pandemic has, on the struggles we have as far as lower income families who may not even have internet services, who may not have computers. So that's something that is of something we should very much focus on in the state in order to keep the money coming and adequately fund our schools so that doesn't happen again in the event, God forbid, we're here again in the future.
Thank you. Laura?
COVID-19 has highlighted the health inequities that exist in our healthcare system. We've all seen the reports that Blacks and Latinos have died at higher rates. And in fact, Blacks are twice as likely to die from COVID than whites. So that's really a serious problem. In Suffolk County and Nassau County during the height of the pandemic, both the county executives worked very hard to target minority communities with higher rates of COVID. And they did a lot of outreach education. So I think that if we want to ensure that we're reaching communities of color and ones that are more vulnerable, we have to do more outreach. And during that time, when both county executives saw that happening, they established more testing sites. So, but there's an economic component to this as well. And look, we know systemic and structural racism exists in our healthcare system, education, in our housing system, the housing discrimination highlighted by Newsday's report, and even some of the data that was released today in Newsday about police stops. We have to work on that as well. But we really have to focus our efforts on why is it that even after getting quality healthcare, folks in the Black community have lower outcomes. They don't have outcomes that are as good as folks that are not minorities. So we have to work on that problem. But in terms of access to healthcare, I fully support the federal government dealing with our healthcare crisis in that healthcare has to be made available to all. I support Obamacare. The Republicans are trying to tear down Obamacare, trying to prevent us from getting pre-existing coverage, pre-existing condition coverage. But we have to have a public option on a federal level, and I support that, and that's going to give folks more access to healthcare. Regarding education, we now see in the educational system that we've had inequities as well, where you live depends on how much money your district is going to get per student. We have to address that as well.
Okay, thank you. And Lori, you will be first on the next question also. New York State has recently instituted election reforms, such as early voting, and for this election, by executive order, Governor Cuomo allowed absentee voting without the usual excuses. Do you support such reforms as no excuse absentee voting, same-day registration, consolidation of presidential and local primaries into the same day, and universal mail-in voting? Why or why not?
I absolutely support all of those initiatives in favor of making voting as easy, simple, and accessible to as many people as possible, because we all have to have a say in our government. And I even, you named some of the legislation, same-day voter registration, speeding up the time even it takes for party enrollment. That has to change too. We should absolutely have no excuse absentee ballot. You know, my opponent will tell everyone that he wants them to go out and vote, but yet there's been bills that he's voted against that became law to enhance voter accessibility. My opponent voted against establishing early voting. He voted against pre-registration of 16-year-olds. He voted against mail-in ballots being postmarked on the day of the 2020 election, and even automatic transfer of voter registration from county to county. So, you know, although, you know, folks will say, you know, he'll say that he tells people to vote, but he voted against everything that makes it possible to reduce barriers to voting. Why would we want any obstacle for seniors or folks that are disabled, or even during COVID? We want to ensure that, you know, my mother is 78 years old and she's very vulnerable. She has underlying conditions, and I want to be able to take her to early voting because there's not going to be a lot of people there. She feels strongly. She's Hispanic and she feels strongly about voting in person. That's important to her to have that voice. So when folks vote against early voting, it makes no sense to me. While they'll vote against all of these initiatives to reduce barriers, but then tell people to go out and vote.
Okay, thank you. Anthony?
Sure. Just in a brief rebuttal, of course we want more people to vote. I did vote against early voting because it's an unfunded mandate. It costs millions of dollars to do that. But now that it's there, the numbers have shown that more people, that the numbers that as far as ultimate votes taken or cast during an election year, early voting makes almost a very nominal difference in total votes cast. This year, I think that may change because this is a very divisive presidential year. But I certainly agree with and voted for no excuse absentee. I think that's a great idea. There's no reason to have that, but I also did vote against the other bill that was mentioned where you can have an unpostmarked ballot received after Election Day. I don't think that's appropriate. I think that is ripe for abuse. So very simply, we have a very expansive ability now to vote with the 9 days prior to Election Day. We've got really the 10-day window that starts actually this Saturday coming up, folks. Start voting. Don't be shy. Starting this Saturday. And then, of course, no excuse absentee. Now, it really is actually still excuse absentee by executive order, but you can check off temporary illness. I agree with that. If people don't want to go to the polls, they should absolutely 100% have access to a ballot. So it's very simple. No excuse absentee. The early voting does exist. The state put no money on it. That's why I voted no. So now the municipalities are dealing with the costs that are going to start this Saturday, even more so. They're going to have to pay for it. And they have obviously 2 or 4 people from either side, that there's an expense to this. And we have more than enough unfunded mandates in New York State. But if we put money on it, I think that would be a good idea. I don't agree with accepting ballots that are received after Election Day, but be that as it may, I'm out of time. Thank you.
Okay, we have a rebuttal here. Laura?
I just wanted to clarify that ballot being postmarked after would require that the Board of Election had time stamped it before the election day. So just to clarify, it's not receiving ballots well after the election, long after. It would have to require that the Board of Election time stamped it before the passing of the date to receive the ballots in the mail.
Anthony, another rebuttal.
Right, but it doesn't need a postmark. That was my problem with that bill. Unpostmarked. Since when does a post office not postmark a ballot? So if you have a number of them that were time stamped without a postmark that it went through the post office, I had a concern with that. And that's why I voted no.
Okay, let's go on to the next question. And on this one, Anthony, you will go first. Long Island faces challenges in sustaining clean water due to the pollution of the aquifer and in developing and implementing a plan to address the threat of rising sea levels. What initiatives would you propose to preserve preserve our water for future generations?
Well, I think in my tenure there and prior to that, Senator Lavalle has been an amazing advocate for the environment, as has Assemblyman Thiel over these many, many years. And the CPF, I think, has really been a wonderful program that has been copied and emulated around the country. And we did in 2015, I believe it was, we extended it out to 2050, and then allowed, instead of that just going to the fund, just paying for land preservation, we extended it to include water quality issues like estuaries and stormwater runoff, and of course, our sole source aquifer, because we drink from what's below our feet. We have done made very significant progress regarding controlling pesticides, and I certainly support the advanced septic system inclusion as far as a 50% renovation or an overall rebuild or a new home. That the biggest issue, 75% of our nitrogen issue is from septic. And based upon the geography of the East End, we cannot sewer the East End. It's just not possible. Not even if we had the money, you couldn't necessarily do it in light of water tables and so forth and the nature of the geography. So private septic systems are a problem, and we're incentivizing that now. We're moving forward, and I think that's a big concern. And it will get better, and we're getting better. We're getting it under control, but PFOA issues, this has all come to the forefront. And just in recent years, has this really become an issue that everyone has recognized. And I think on both sides of the aisle, we get it. And that's what's been great. But I would say, I think the farmland preservation, that was one of Senator Lavalle's bills many, many moons ago, that has been great. And the CPF, I think, has been wonderful, and we'll continue to extend that out in order to achieve our goals.
Thank you. Laura?
The way to protect our drinking water is to prevent pollution in the first place by government-funded land acquisition. So Long Island, as Tony said, Long Island sits upon a sole source aquifer, but that sole source aquifer is being contaminated by nitrogen, and by far the most emergent contaminants of any region in the state. So we have industrial chemicals leaking into our aquifer from spills, pesticides, fertilizers, and toxic chemicals. And nitrogen leakage from septic tanks and cesspools are absolutely contaminating our drinking and surface water. It's just, a couple of days ago, Newsday reported on the annual assessment of water quality, and it painted one dire picture of the challenges that we are facing in our waterways, including toxic tide algal blooms and fish kills. I mean, this has just been going on for years, and we need to see more improvements. I just keep seeing things are getting worse. So these blooms are absolutely wreaking havoc on our local fisheries, our economy, tourism, which we're so reliant upon. So every major bay and estuary, according to this Newsday report, was affected by the algal blooms this summer. So the solution is that we have to have the IA, innovative alternative nitrogen reducing septic systems, installed. And the answer from a statewide basis, from what we will be doing in our role as a state senator, I would be ensuring that we know on a local level the amount of money that's available. Yes, the Community Preservation Fund now allows for money to be used, 20% of that to be used for water quality. But most people don't know that there's millions of dollars right now that's available through the New York State Septic Replacement Grant Program. And the first year, 75 million was allocated. Only 15 grants in Suffolk County were given. And then there's another 60 million available and allocated. And the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation provides state grants for water quality infrastructure projects, with West Hampton Beach just got 1.7 million of it. So there's a lot we can do on a state level.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
You will go first next. And the next question is, almost every family on the East End of Long Island has been directly affected by one of the numerous tick-borne diseases. Would you press New York State to more aggressively manage our deer population, which is directly related to the tick disease epidemic, through changes in the state's conservation law and the DEC regulations.
Absolutely. Ecologists say that most areas can only support about 10 deer per square mile, but we are on overload on the North and South Fork. The only viable solution is to significantly reduce the overpopulation of deer. And, you know, I understand animal rights activists and their positions about this, but people also really have to understand that this is destroying our agricultural business. This is tick-borne illnesses are causing serious health problems. So we really have to attack this problem from every possible angle. And the use of pesticides that kill ticks, arachicides, I think they're called, they carry the risk of all kinds of collateral damage to organisms, and the effectiveness is limited by both rainfall and irrigation, and the fact that tick-bearing wildlife like deer must frequent that treated area, so that's not working. Four-poster deer ticking isn't working. Deer fertility controls and anti-tick vaccines are unworkable and unaffordable. I will work with the DEC and with locals to come up with a plan to enhance controlled hunting, and if need be, to consider supplemental hunting, maybe with professional deer culling, and ensure that the venison is distributed to the needy. The individual communities know what their individual issues are, but we need like a more comprehensive plan that's going to cover the North and South Fork and the East End. I mean, I live in Port Jefferson, and we have a serious deer problem in Belterre as well. So we need to work in Senate District 1 with DEC and locals to really reduce the deer population so that we can prevent all these collisions, and we've seen that reported in Newsday, and the illnesses and also the damage that's being created in our farms.
Thank you.
Sure. And I live all the way out east. You know, as I said, I live in New Suffolk, so I live in the town of Southold, so we see them. They're like raccoons by me, you know, they're everywhere. And, you know, we've tried culling with the snipers, and that doesn't seem to really work. Assemblyman Thiel, myself, and Senator Lavalle had put in a budget a few years ago to reduce setbacks for bow hunting. In North Haven was really the best example, believe it or not, even though it's on the South Fork, wasn't in my district. We were using that as an example. When you had the setbacks at 500 feet, there were only little tiny areas where you could actually hunt. So we reduced the setbacks to 50 feet so that hunters could ultimately continue to thin the herd, which has made some progress. I think that was an important thing. Just to have just naturally, because the hunters, it would cost millions of dollars to have the snipers and professionals come in from Department of Agriculture to try and thin the herd appropriately, where the hunters can do it. We expanded the season. We think that was a really good start. I support allowing the use of crossbows for seniors and other people who can't necessarily use a compound bow. You can't use rifle on Long Island. That can be done safely and smartly, because I think that's the way to do it, is probably the easiest way. We're not going to introduce natural predators like coyotes to Long Island to ultimately chase them around our yards. So it's got to be done on a more comprehensive way, and reducing the setbacks safely, which is what we did, I think helped a lot, and just enhancing the hunting community will probably help even more.
Thank you. And Anthony, you will go first on the next question. Governor Cuomo has been enforcing measures against the pandemic recommended by the Center for Disease Control. To what extent do you support these measures, and would you prefer to see tighter or looser enforcement?
Sure. Well, I think the governor did a good job in the beginning. When we got to the nursing home issue, now it's being blamed on everyone but himself and Dr. Zucker, who's the commissioner of the Department of Health. I think that was a terrible decision. And I think if he would have simply said, look, I made a mistake, We were making game time decisions. This is the best information that we had at the time. It was not good to do. It was bad. It may have cost lives. And, these are the things that sadly that we need to deal with when we're in a crisis like this. But he hasn't done that. And I think that's creating, it's spiraling downward now, where he's refusing to accept responsibility and blaming it on everyone. And I think that's almost generating an even tighter enforcement of social distancing and fining and taking restaurants, liquor licenses. I mean, when you think about the New York State Legislature, they want to release murderers at the age of 55. Now that we have one party rule up there, they want to release them after they've served 15 years of a life sentence at 55. Not like it's that old. I just turned 50 this year. But, they want to do that. But then when a bunch of kids act like dopey kids at Syracuse and have a party, they kick them all out and they'll give them their money back. So I think that we can do this smartly. Like I said earlier, that this is something that we all understand the severity of it. Those at higher risk, those with comorbidities can protect themselves. But to continue to keep mom and pop businesses closed and now to magnanimously open, for example, movie theaters, they can get it. They get it. They can do it. And it's all at his whim because he has total control right now with that executive power. And I do think that it's gone too far. You need to let us open up and do it smartly and keep an eye on things with strict guidelines and make sure that they're abided by, not continuing to hold everyone hostage, because I think that's crushing our economy and crushing our businesses.
Thank you. Laura?
I think that the governor did a phenomenal job in bringing us through this human catastrophe that we all have suffered. So many folks have died, over 2,200 here in Suffolk County, across New York State. It's near 30,000 or over 30,000, but a lot of folks did die in nursing homes and did die in care facilities. And that's deeply troubling to me, especially because in the beginning, the starting point was out in Peconic, and we were trying to get tests out there, and there were no tests available. But what I would say is that I'd like to start a pandemic response unit. Number one, so that if this ever happens again, we can get medical professionals, law enforcement, essential workers, the test and supply of protective equipment they need. We can provide greater support to school districts for managing their hybrid learning, which they have done a phenomenal job of opening and closing. And whenever there's been a teacher that tests positive, they're doing the right thing. So small businesses, though, have pretty much done the right thing as well. I think that if, and I said this before, if Walmart was open and selling jeans and tchotchke, so could the small business owner. They could have followed the rules too. So on one hand, I really do support the governor and the science that he has found, or that rather he has followed to help us to prevent the spread. But at the same time, I think that some of the rules could have been lessened because their small businesses were literally closing their doors, and they could have followed some of the rules. Some small businesses have not followed the rules, and we've seen what happened there too. But I also want to ensure that we hold those accountable for what happened in nursing homes. We saw at one point about a third of the folks who died in New York State died in nursing homes. So what I want to take a look at is the operators of the nursing homes, because they didn't have to accept people into the nursing homes if they could not keep them safe. So I want to look at that as well.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go next, Laura, on the next question. As a consequence of the pandemic, K-12 and higher education institutions are now relying more on distance education and need to initiate social distancing and personal protection measures. What changes would you support in state funding to accommodate these changes?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. There was a cell phone noise.
Oh, okay. As a consequence of the pandemic, K-12 and higher education institutions are now relying more on distance education, and they need to initiate social distancing and personal protection measures. What changes would you support in state funding to accommodate these changes?
Well, first and foremost, as I said, I want to start a COVID pandemic unit, and that pandemic unit would create a regional approach to purchasing items such as the PPE that we needed. What started happening during the pandemic, if we remember from the beginning, when we thought we needed to have 20,000 ventilators, we were scurrying around trying to compete with other states who were looking for the same ventilators, and even the federal government who was competing. Clearly, the federal government failed us, and they were not organizing with each of the states. They left us kind of on our own, but the governor set up regional purchasing. So that's something that I would do to ensure that our school districts and even our medical professionals and law enforcement have the PPE that they need. So on a statewide basis, I would make sure that that's readily available to them. And also, distance learning has created an interesting dilemma, right? So here we're in a situation where we have to protect children from this pandemic, and they have to be educated. So we have communities right now in SD1 where those districts don't have enough money to provide resources to kids. They don't have laptops. Some families don't even have internet access, and they're trying to go to libraries, but some of the libraries just can't, some aren't open, and some can't accommodate them. So there's, we need to create public-private partnerships with some of the producers of laptops so that school districts and students can get access to the technology that they need. When it comes to the last part of your question, social distancing, I think that schools are doing a phenomenal job in their schedule. Each district is different, so we shouldn't really be telling one particular district what they shouldn't do, but we can support them by giving them PPE and the technology they need to educate students.
Thank you. Anthony?
Sure, and the question is regarding funding. Well, in 2015, the governor was specifically advised that if he might want to consider stockpiling in case of, and this was specific, a pandemic relative to some sort of respiratory disease. And we don't need commissions, we don't need task forces. How about we take the $100 million that's been set aside for public financing of campaigns? How about that one? And there you go. That is the bulk of what we need in storage in the event this were to happen again, and to purchase the appropriate PPE. That is $100 million that was in this current budget to publicly finance campaigns. And there's a laundry list of areas where we can find the money to simply have the resources available in case, God forbid, this happens again. Quite simple. We need to fully fund our schools. This needs to be a line item. I think no one wants to reimagine education, but I think the pandemic has certainly shown that there are some different dynamics at play now, that we don't want remote learning. I think the social interaction is very important. As I said, I have 2 high school kids, a 9th and 11th grader. And children, by the way, I think that the local control is important, and they do get it, and they're hybrid. What my kids are experiencing right now, children under 18, according to the CDC, which are the guidelines that the governor has been following, the CDC said it indicates that you're more likely to die of spinal meningitis under 18 than you are of COVID at this point. So, they can do it on their own. We don't want to mandate, and this isn't a Common Core situation where we're going to paint everyone with the same brush. One size doesn't fit all. Rural communities with small classes are different than urban communities with really, thousands and thousands of people. There were 981 kids in my class at Patrick Medford. So every school's different. They need to be able to do what they can do on their own.
Okay, thank you. And Anthony, you go first on the next one. Population changes revealed by the census this year may require redistricting. Do you support a nonpartisan redistricting committee that includes no current members of the legislature? Why or why not? And if not, what would you propose?
That's a wonderful question. And the answer is yes, I support it. Unfortunately, at least in the Assembly, they passed a bill that would reduce the supermajority in order to override the governor for redistricting, which is terrifying. So the way it works is just like a regular bill, that if there was a supermajority, which there is in the Assembly, that you need 2/3 vote to override the governor if he didn't approve the redistricting maps. That bill also included removing the requirement that no more than 5 senators can represent a borough, as long as that you've got enough population in order to fill at least more than 5 seats. And the reason why that's important is some districts in New York City are extremely one way. They are very, very heavy enrollment in one particular party, particularly New York City. And they don't want the ability to gerrymander, so some of those suburban districts can be watered down and be heavier. And we can say it because we know the enrollment in New York, it's Democrat. It's 70-30 roughly is the breakdown in the state. And in some of those New York City districts, it's 90% registered Democratic Party, 10% all others. So without an independent redistricting commission, the Republican Party would probably be redistricted and gerrymandered into oblivion. And that's not good. Balance is good in politics. And that's where I think when in the last 50 years, you've had 3 years that it's been one party rule. 2010, we got the MTA tax for Long Island, and the last year and a half, where we got all this anti-police legislation. We have unanimously all 6 Democratic senators on Long Island voted for the budget, which funneled tens of millions of dollars to New York City. They reduced the foundation aid formula so that everybody got less on Long Island. It's not good for suburbia right now having one party rule. We need balance.
Thank you. And Laura?
Well, yes, we amended our constitution to alter the process for legislative redistricting. One change created that independent redistricting commission for recommending new borders, but I believe we need much more transparency. And I know they held one hearing already, and there'll be more hearings to come. And there has to be transparency and a more non-partisan apportionment process that allows citizens to provide input. And I will absolutely be an outspoken voice to keep the commission accountable to draw fair lines that aren't gerrymandered, specifically to keep the minority districts intact. And also one mention I want to mention before, because I see the clock is ticking, that I do support campaign finance reform. I mean, we absolutely need campaign finance reform. We need to have some type of bonus multiplier for small dollar contributions, which data has shown to ensure that more women candidates and more diverse candidates are in our elected bodies. But also something that wasn't mentioned was replacing the Joint Commission on Public Ethics and Legislative Ethics Commission, JCOPE. We need to have an independent commission that is very similar to the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct. So that right now, my opponent refused to support the creation of that commission. That commission is what's going to eliminate JCOPE and the Legislative Ethics Commission. Corruption scandals have absolutely repeatedly rocked the state legislature and the executive branch over the last decade. So we absolutely need an independent body that would be very similarly structured to the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct. And Tony also mentioned something about anti-police legislation. It's getting to the point where the fear-mongering we're kind of like getting a little numb to that, because there's some really good things that were done to keep poor folks out of jail. But we have a lot more changes to make. I don't disagree there because I support those changes. But just to keep anti-police.
And we have a rebuttal from Anthony.
Thank you, Estelle. And just a quick comment that I'm not sure what commission Ms. Ahern's talking about, but I voted against the Commission on Prosecutorial Misconduct because it was illegal and it was struck down by the courts. But I've always been outspoken against JCOPE. There was a Moreland Commission that was created really appointees by the governor. And when they started to poke into some of the governor's dealings, they disbanded it. So I've always had a problem with the ethics review in Albany. That's what I ran on when I first went as a former prosecutor. When I first went for this, for public office, when I first threw my hat in the ring. And I've always had a problem with that. The Joint Commission on Public Ethics is certainly, I think that they're a little bit impotent, as is the Inspector General's office that doesn't seem to catch anything. Meanwhile, we have legislators getting indicted and getting in trouble and abusing their position, in droves. So that's something I've always had a problem with. So that's inaccurate what you just said.
Okay, thank you. This is now going to be the last question. And Laura, you will go first. Senator Lavalle was very influential on the Senate Education Committee for many years. What one achievement or position promoted by Senator Lavalle over his long years in office would you continue? And what one thing would you like to change? And additionally, what committee would you hope to join that would help our district?
Wow, Senator Lavalle has done so much. I mean, there's so much to choose from. He's been a steward to our environment, specifically the Pine Barrens Act. I would just continue to do the wonderful work that he has done in SD1. He was a strong collaborator with everybody on every side, Democrat, Republican, Independent. He brought so much to the East End with colleges and our healthcare as well. He did so much, actually. Most people don't know that he did so much for rape crisis centers and domestic violence providers. He was a person who we collaborated with in my organization at the Crime Victim Center when school districts were having trouble with individual offenders that were coming into their community. He came to me and we worked together on an automated, efficient system to inform community members of the danger of individuals that pose a risk to public safety. I would absolutely continue his environmental roundtables, and I look forward to. I actually ran into him at a restaurant we both frequent recently, and I said to him, I hope to, if I am elected, I hope to count on your support, that you will help to educate me and help to mentor me as Assemblyman Engelbright and Fred Thiel will do in this role. So I would have to say that I would continue very much with the work that he has done with the environment and also with our school districts for education funding and also in higher education. So I would like to first and foremost join my colleague Todd Kaminsky, who is the chair of the Environmental Conservation Committee, who I have a wonderful working relationship with. I've been endorsed by him. I've been endorsed by the full, all of the senators here locally, but I'd be on environmental conservation, agriculture, education, commerce, crime victims, crime and corrections, and higher education.
Thank you. Anthony?
Sure. Well, they are big shoes to fill, right? And if it's any one thing, I don't know if we could pick one. The Community Preservation Fund was great, but STAR exemption is what really comes to mind. He's been a tremendous mentor for me in those years. And as I said earlier, I was never in public office prior to 2013. I threw my hat in the ring and was elected and have been there ever since. But he's been really, once I was able to find the men's room, he's been a tremendous mentor to really teach the dynamics of this district, because it is a dynamic district. When you've got, as I mentioned, all of the East End rural areas, and then you have suburbia on the West End, even in my assembly district. As I said, it's just a mirror. It's kind of a mini version of the Senate district. But Senator Lavalle is the architect of the STAR exemption, and that's what makes life livable here. And he's done so much for higher education, as you said. Stony Brook, he's got obviously the Stony Brook hat has been his trademark. We actually, some of you may have even gotten some of the mail that we did. It was his idea of him handing me and passing off the Stony Brook hat, which is really a wonderful thing. And you know, and he's supporting my campaign, I think, because we've worked so well together. And he's taught me a lot. So it's someone that I think whoever wins the seat needs to emulate. He has done tremendous work for this district, for the environment, for taxes, for jobs. And the star exemption in and of itself has been really, as the school tax relief is so critical to life on Long Island. Now, the committees, I would like the same committees that I'm on in the Assembly right now. I'm on the Environmental Conservation Committee. I'm the ranking Republican on Judiciary, and I'm on codes. That kind of fits into my wheelhouse as a former prosecutor, cop's kid. That's the stuff I know really well. As a practicing lawyer for 20 years. That's very helpful. Agriculture, of course, is really important, as are our farms. So I think those committees will certainly complement this district and put us in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. And now both candidates will give their closing statements, and Anthony Palumbo will go first.
Great, thank you. And you said 1 minute?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I just wanted to thank the league for having this debate. These are always fun, a little bit spirited. You know, this is certainly what this process is all about. And in a pandemic year, where we're doing it in our offices and in our living rooms and kitchens. But I thank you for doing this. And for those folks listening, I would respectfully suggest that my record speaks for itself on the environment, on creating opportunities for people. As I said, my first time homebuyer exemption, recognizing the needs of the East End for the North Fork Mental Health Initiative, bonding for Fisher's Island, all of these things. It's been an absolute honor to serve in public office and to serve the members of and constituents of the 2nd Assembly District. I hope that I can continue in the legislature because it's the Senate or bust. That this position, I can't run for 2 offices at once, so I'm forfeiting my position in the Assembly to run for Senate. It's an amazing place, and I hope to have everyone's vote. Thank you.
Laura?
Am I muted now? My cat was
Now we
meowing.
can hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much for hosting this event. We need a senator in this seat who is a fighter like me, because we have a lot to protect: our environment, our water, education, healthcare, public safety, human rights, workers' rights, and social justice. You know my 25-year track record. I received endorsements from the Sierra Club and the Environmental Voters Forum. And for 3 years in a row, Tony received a D grade from the League of Conservation Voters. My opponent has voted against women's rights. He voted against the Women's Equality Act, the Reproductive Health Act, and the Comprehensive Contraceptive Coverage Act. He voted against many voters' rights bills, including early voting. And you know, he was the only candidate in this race who acknowledged the need for bail reform. He's the only candidate in this race that was elected official when bail reform passed, and he did not get judicial discretion put in place. Look, I'm going to be in the majority. I will add to the strength of the existing Senate delegation. The Senate is not going to get overturned. I'm a social worker, an attorney, a fighter with 25 years of hands-on experience, and I'm prepared to dedicate my life to you and to the folks in SD1, and I'm humbly asking for your vote.
Thank you. Thank you both. And thank you, everyone. And remember to vote. Early voting this year is from October 24th through November 1st, and absentee ballots may be sent in as soon as you receive them or dropped off at any polling place that is open for voting. Alternatively, of course, you may vote on Election Day, November 3rd. However you do it, just be sure to vote. Thank you.